What if the latest polls across the key battlegrounds on the 2024 electoral map miss the final result like they have over the last four presidential elections? I've gone back and calculated the average polling error across the 17 most competitive states from the 2008, 2012, 2016, and 2020 cycles. Using that data, we'll see what the 2024 Electoral College map would look like if that same polling error occurs in these grayed out states. To clarify, I'll be using a weighted error metric, which is adjusted for recency, meaning the 2020 polling error carries more weight than 2016, and so on. I'll apply this weighted error to the latest polling averages available on Real Clear Polling, then use the adjusted results to assign ratings like likely, lean, tilt, and toss-up on our map. Let's jump right into it, starting with Arizona. Trump currently leads Harris by an average of 1.1%, with Trump at 48.4% and Harris at 47.3%, based on the 11 most recent surveys taken over the last 3 weeks. Now, looking back at previous polling errors in Arizona, Republican presidential candidates have consistently outperformed the polls by an average of 2.3% over the last 4 election cycles. For example, in 2020, the polls underestimated Trump by exactly 2.3%, as Biden won by just 0.3% compared to the 2.6% lead he held in the polling average going into Election Day. Arizona stands out because the Republican candidate has been underestimated in all 4 of the past elections: John McCain by 5 points in 2008, Romney by 1.6 points in 2012, and Trump by 1.8 points in 2016 and 2.3 points in 2020. So using that weighted polling error average of R plus 2.3 and adding it to the current Real Clear polling average, Trump's lead would expand to 3.4%. That's calculated by adding 1.1% to 2.3%, the average polling error, giving us 3.4%. Based on our margin categories, this would place Arizona in the lean Republican column, represented by the second lightest shade of red on the map. For your reference, margins less than 2.5% are tilt, 2.5% to 7% are lean, 7% to 10% likely, and greater than 10% safe. Next is Colorado, worth 10 electoral votes. This is one of the fastest left-trending states in the nation, and it's no longer considered in play for Trump and the Republican Party, which is reflected in the fact that we have just one poll here since President Biden dropped out of the race. It shows Harris leading by 11 points, a slight underperformance compared to Biden's near 14-point win in 2020. Yet when looking at the sheet here, you can see that Democrats have actually been underestimated by 1.8% on average here over the last 4 cycles. Interestingly, Colorado is actually the only state where Democrats have been underestimated in all 4 cycles. So adding 1.8% to Harris's margin, we get a Harris plus 12.8 final result, which is more than enough to place Colorado in the safe blue column here on our map. Next up is Florida, the electoral behemoth with 30 votes at stake. Right now, the polling average has Trump leading Harris by 6.1%, with Trump holding 50.3% support to Harris's 44.2% based on the last 6 surveys. Given Florida's sharp rightward shift in recent election cycles, Trump's strong lead here is no surprise. Looking at the historical polling error, Florida has underestimated Republicans by an average of 2.5% since 2008. The error was particularly pronounced in 2020, when Biden led the final polling average by 2.5 points, but Trump ended up winning by 3.4%, the largest margin for a presidential candidate in Florida since 2004. Florida was also one of the few states where Trump performed better in 2020 than in 2016. Considering that historical polling error, Trump's current 6-point lead over Harris in the Real Clear average expands to 8.5% when adjusted. This solidifies Florida as a likely Republican state on our electoral map. Now let's move just north of Florida to Georgia, where Trump holds a very narrow lead of just half a percentage point, 48.3% to 47.8%. This race is incredibly close and well within the margin of error. What's particularly interesting here is that, unlike in many other battleground states, The polls in Georgia have been quite accurate over the last decade, even in 2016 and 2020, when Trump overperformed in many other states. He was only underestimated by about a point in Georgia. Looking at the historical polling error, the overall weighted average shows just a 0.5% bias in favor of Democrats. Applying that small adjustment to the current polling average shifts Trump's lead from 0.5% to 1%, keeping Georgia in the tilt Republican column. This would mark a second flip for Trump alongside Arizona, as both states were the closest in 2020, Georgia at D plus 0.3 and Arizona at D plus 0.2. Now we dip into the critical Midwest region, starting with Iowa, one of the fastest right-trending states in the country. We have yet to see a single poll between Trump and Harris since Biden dropped out. Iowa voted for Trump by strong margins in both 2016 and 2020, but it was still far more competitive than some other states where we've seen several polls come out. In the absence of current polling, we'll place Iowa in the likely Republican category based on Trump's 2020 margin of +8. For what it's worth, Iowa has experienced one of the largest polling underestimations of Republicans in recent cycles, with an average error of 4.6%. This includes 6 to 7 point underestimations of Trump in both 2016 and 2020, further solidifying its position as likely Republican on our map. Up to the northeast, we go to Maine now. So far, just 3 polls have been released here this cycle, and when averaged out, they show Harris leading by 11.6%. This represents an overperformance compared to Biden's 9-point victory in 2020. Historically, polling in Maine has slightly overestimated Democratic presidential candidates by an average of just under a point. When adjusting for that polling error, Harris's lead in Maine becomes 10.7%, still a solid Democratic margin, so Maine will be placed in the safe Democrat category on our map. As for Maine's 2nd district, I've already placed it in the likely Republican column, while Nebraska's 2nd district goes in the lean Democrat column, both based on their 2020 results. Now let's head over to Michigan, the first state in our Rust Belt core trio. Michigan is arguably the bluest of the 3 in terms of its fundamentals and demographic trends, especially after it voted for Biden by 3 points in 2020. However, in 2024, Trump has recently taken the lead in the polling average by 0.9%, with 48.5% to Harris's 47.6% based on the last 10 polls. This shift is particularly concerning for Harris, as she had consistently led Trump by 1 to 2 points since taking over as the Democratic nominee. What makes it even more worrying is that Michigan's polls have historically underestimated Republicans by 1.7% on average, and more specifically, Trump by 3.5% in 2016 and 5.1% in 2020. If we apply that 1.7% polling error to Trump's current margin, his lead increases to 2.6%, which moves Michigan into the lean Republican category on our map. Michigan is crucial for Harris's path to victory, as it is generally expected to vote to the left of its Rust Belt neighbors, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Losing all 3 would certainly close Harris's path to 270 electoral votes. Jumping 2 states to the west, our next state is Minnesota, where Real Clear polling has Harris leading in her running mate Tim Walz's home state by 4.7% on average over the last 4 polls, ranging from Harris +3 to Harris +6. 49% to 44.3%. This would mark a more than 2-point underperformance for Harris compared to Biden's 7-point margin 4 years ago. Here on our sheet, you see the overall weighted error in Minnesota is R+2, meaning Republicans have been underestimated by a similar degree to Michigan, Florida, and Arizona. The largest miss in Minnesota came in 2016, where Clinton led by more than 7 points, headed into Election Day, yet came just 1.5 points from a surprise loss. Now, with a 2-point adjustment to the poll average, Kamala Harris's lead drops to 2.7%, still in the lean Democrat range regardless here, as 10 electoral votes from Minnesota are added to the vice president's tally. Now shifting back out west to Nevada, Trump has taken a slim lead in the latest polling average by 0.2%, largely driven by a recent Wall Street Journal survey showing Trump up by 6 points among 600 registered voters. This is the first time Trump has led in Nevada since late August, which is another concerning trend for Harris, considering Nevada has voted blue in each of the last 4 presidential elections. Interestingly, polling history in Nevada suggests a slight overestimation of Republican support, with an average bias of 0.6% in their favor. This makes Nevada one of only 4 states where Democrats have been underestimated on our sheet. While polls did overestimate Biden's performance in 2020, like almost every other state, the opposite was true in 2016, 2012, and in 2008, when polls underestimated Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. If we adjust Trump's slim lead for this historical bias, the result flips to a narrow Harris lead of 0.4%. Still well within the margin of error. However, this is enough for Nevada to tilt in Harris's direction on our electoral map. Our next state is New Hampshire, up in New England. In 2020, Biden won New Hampshire by 7 points, and like Minnesota, Trump came close to flipping it in 2016 before it shifted solidly back into the Democratic column. The latest average from Real Clear polling shows Harris leading Trump by 7.4%, a slight improvement on Biden's margin from 2020. However, New Hampshire has a historical polling error of R+2, meaning the GOP has been underestimated by 2 points on average, similar to Minnesota. In 2016 and 2020, the error was identical, underestimating Trump by 3.8% in both cycles. Applying that 2-point adjustment to the current polling average, Harris's lead decreases from 7.4% to 5.4%, shifting New Hampshire from likely Democrat to lean Democrat on our map. Next up is New Mexico. In 2020, New Mexico voted to the right of neighboring Colorado for the first time in over 50 years, and that trend is expected to continue this November. Harris leads Trump by 8 points on average across the last 3 polls, down from Biden's 11-point win in 2020. However, New Mexico is one of the 4 states where Republicans have been overestimated in the past. The average polling error here since 2008 is D plus 1.3. Adjusting for this, Harris's lead increases from 8 points to 9.3 points. Therefore, New Mexico remains solidly in the likely Democrat category on our map. Now over to North Carolina, where the Real Clear polling average shows Trump with a slim lead of 0.5%, polling at 48.7% to Harris's 48.2%. This average is based on 11 polls, with Trump leading in 7, Harris leading in 1, and 3 showing a tie. It's worth noting that all these surveys fall within the margin of error, and the only poll showing Harris in the lead comes from a less reputable pollster, Atlas Intel. Looking at the historical polling errors, North Carolina has a track record of overestimating Democrats by 2.5%. In 2020, for instance, the final polling average had Biden ahead by nearly 2 points, yet Trump won the state by 1.4%. Similarly, in 2016, polls favored Clinton, but Trump ended up winning by almost 4 points. Adjusting for the historical polling error of 2.5%, Trump's lead increases from 0.5% to exactly 3%. This places North Carolina in the lean Republican category on our electoral map. Now back to the Midwest with Ohio, a state once known as the ultimate bellwether, but now considered reliably Republican-leaning. Trump leads by 7.4%, according to Real Clear Polling's average of the latest 7 polls. Interestingly, Trump has led by exactly 6 points in each of the last 3 polls, which might suggest a slight underperformance compared to his 8-point winning margin in both 2016 and in 2020. That said, Ohio has one of the largest average polling errors, tied with Iowa at R plus 4.6%. While Barack Obama was underestimated in 2008 and 2012 when he won the state, Trump significantly outperformed his narrow polling leads in 2016 and 2020 by 6.5% and 7.2%, respectively. In 2020, for example, he led Biden by less than a point in 538's final average, but ended up winning by 8 points. Adjusting for Ohio's historical polling error, Trump's lead increases from 7.4% to 12%, moving Ohio from likely Republican to safe Republican on our map. With just 4 states left and neither candidate yet reaching 270 electoral votes, Trump leads with 237, narrowly ahead of Harris's 219, leaving 82 votes still up for grabs. Let's move on to Pennsylvania, one of the top battleground states in 2024. According to Real Clear polling, Trump now leads by 0.3%, with a vote share of 48.3% to Harris's 48%. Trump has led in 7 of the last 12 polls, marking the first consistent lead he's held in Pennsylvania for a while. Historically, polls in Pennsylvania have underestimated Trump. In 2016, Hillary Clinton led by 4.1% in the polls heading into Election Day, but Trump ended up winning by 0.7%. In 2020, while Biden's victory was correctly predicted, the polls overestimated his margin by 3.5 points. The average bias comes out to R plus 2.2. Applying this adjustment, Trump's lead expands to 2.5%, placing Pennsylvania in the lean Republican category. This should all but guarantee Trump's victory, especially with Texas still outstanding. Now moving to Texas, the second largest state with 40 electoral votes at stake. Trump leads by 5.7%, according to Real Clear polling, nearly identical to his 5.6% win in 2016. Texas has historically overestimated Democratic support by 1.9% since 2008, driven largely by a 4.5-point underestimation of Trump in 2020, when 538 had Biden within 1 point, but Trump won by 5.6%. Applying this adjustment, Trump's lead in Texas increases to 7.6%, moving it from lean to likely Republican on our map. This lifts Trump over the 270 mark, putting him at 296 electoral votes, securing his victory with 2 states to go now. Penultimately, let's head to Virginia, where the latest polling average shows Harris leading by approximately 6.5 points. The Commonwealth voted for Biden by 10 points in 2020, so this still marks an underperformance for Harris, though it is the strongest advantage Democrats have held all cycle. Remember, Biden had trailed Trump here while he remained in the race. That's noteworthy considering the historical polling in Virginia has been among the most accurate, with misses in 2016 and 2020 within 2 points. Given the relatively minor polling errors, Harris's lead only increases slightly from 6.4% to 6.5% after adjusting for the weighted error. As a result, we'll place Virginia in the lean Democrat category on our electoral map. Finally, we close out the video with Wisconsin. The Real Clear polling average in the Badger State shows Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump by an extremely narrow margin of just 0.3%. Like in Michigan and Pennsylvania, Harris has led since late July, though she hasn't quite lost her edge here yet. In terms of polling errors, Wisconsin has seen some of the largest underestimations of Trump in recent cycles. In 2016, Hillary Clinton led by 5.9% in the final average, but lost by 0.8%. In 2020, Biden led by 8.4%, but only won by a razor-thin margin of 0.7%. The overall weighted polling error is R plus 4.3, the highest among truly competitive states. Applying that 4.3-point adjustment completely flips Harris's slim lead into a Trump advantage of 4 points. As a result, Wisconsin moves from tilt Democrat to lean Republican on the electoral map. So using the latest polling averages in key battlegrounds across the country and then shifting them by the average error in the previous 4 presidential elections, Donald Trump would win the 2024 presidential election with 306 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 232. You can feel free to comment your thoughts and feelings about this map in the comment section below. I appreciate all positive or negative comments. That does it for today's video though. Shout out to my channel members in the description below. Make sure to subscribe to my channel down below, and please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.